Whitfield's report is dedicated to the first responders of 9/11, 2001. Thank you for your service and your sacrifice in defending New York City against terrorism and for the sacrifices that you and your family made that day. God bless you and your families. We will never forget what you did for our country. And God bless you and your families. Thank you very much. It's Sam Whitfield, and welcome to a very special edition of the Whitfield Report for Friday, September 11th, 2019. And yes, today is the 19th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, 9/11. I was about 6 or 7 years old when the Twin Towers came down on that fateful day. And what's significant about 9/11 for me is, it's the political event and the historical event that got me into politics and history from a very early age. I remember my mom was getting me dressed for school that day, and as a rule, she never had the TV on when she was getting me ready for school. But a family friend called and told her that she absolutely had to turn on the TV, and so she did. And right as she was getting me dressed, she brought me out into the living room, and we saw the second tower impact. And that explosion, the fireball that came from the second plane, is still seared into my memory. Now, the other thing that is pretty significant about 9/11 for me, at the very least, is the day before that, my mom had taken out a book on New York City tourist attractions because we were planning on going to New York City on like a family trip for one of my school breaks at the time. That would have been my fall vacation. And we were planning on going to New York City, and we had been planning it like since August of that year. And we had gotten like tickets and everything, and then 9/11 happened, and those got canceled, obviously, but they gave us tickets, and we were able to go back later in like late October. So you know, we 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 were one of the first flights that was allowed back into Manhattan. And one of the things that I remember, and this is probably another reason why I still remember, 9/11 so significantly personally, is I remember the smell of burning gasoline, and that was just really prevalent in the city still. I mean, you could smell all over Manhattan, and you could also smell the burning steel of the wreckage. So that was very significant to me as well. And then one thing that wasn't significant to me at the time, but was significant to my mother, was the fact that um, New Yorkers were nice to everyone, and everyone was really courteous in New York City. And just to give you some background, my mother grew up on the East Coast. She grew up in Connecticut. And as a teenager, she used to go into Manhattan with my aunt, her younger sister, when they were teenagers. And this was back in the, late 70s, early, 80s when they did this. And, New York was much more gritty back then. If you've ever seen the movie Taxi Driver, it's kind of New York was really a gritty and kind of dirty city back then. In fact, like New York City was not a tourist attraction that you wanted to go to back then. It was kind of like, you want to go to New York City? What are you nuts? Are you crazy? But my mom grew up going into the city with my aunt, and they always had a good time. But New York City was different back then, and so going to New York City for her after 9/11 it kind of freaked her out because it was so different for her. Um, and that was my first time going to New York City when I was 6, and I've been back like 8 times, since then. The last time I visited was in 2016, and I've loved exploring New York City as an adult. Um, you know, it's been fun. Obviously, I feel really bad for the New Yorkers that are going through COVID because Cuomo just hasn't handled that, well at all, it seems like. And I don't want to get into politics too much today because, today really isn't for that, but, you know, I really do sympathize and empathize with my New York friends and family today, and my thoughts and prayers are with you. So, you know, one of the other things I want to kind of talk with people about is one thing that has struck me is the fact that 9/11, as horrible as it was really an event that united the country by and large, right? After 9/11, we were all united in the fact that we were Americans. There wasn't a whole lot of political infighting. I mean, yeah, the two parties disagreed with each other, but there wasn't the visceral, infighting. You didn't, see Democrats disowning, Republican family members and vice versa, like we have over the past couple of years. You didn't see, you know, conservative family members being called like neo-Nazis or, left-wing liberal members being called communists or anything like that. There just wasn't a political divide after 9/11. Um, and part of that is, I think, honestly, the social media aspect of it. Social media did not really come to fruition really until I was in high school, around 2008, 2009. Um, and I'm not blaming social media for the entirety of, our problems today, but there certainly wasn't, that many inflammatory voices that were just out there, for no other reason than just to troll. Um, since 9/11 has kind of become part of history now, it's interesting because on the one hand, there are, younger people like me who we were young kids, but we still grew up, when 9/11 happened, and we grew up in the aftermath of 9/11, right? So for us, for anyone born in the 90s, in the early to mid 90s at least, there's, there's still some historical relevance to us as people who lived in this time. But I have to tell you, it's kind of freaky to me, um, and it kind of makes me feel old because I have neighbors and I have classmates who I attend college with who were born in, 2000, 2001. This year's high school seniors were born in, 2001 or 2002. So for them, some of them weren't even born when 9/11 happened, or they were infants, right? So they have no, they have no, context personally for how 9/11 went down. So for them, it's entire history. And, they've asked me what it was like growing up in the post 9/11 era. And, I've told them about, you know, the sense of unity after 9/11, which is crazy to them just because everything is so polarized. I want to give a shout out to my friend, you know, Matt on Twitter, Matthew Ale, Ayla, I think is how you pronounce your last name. Sorry, Matt, if I'm butchering your last name, but he's younger and he's a senior in high school now. He just turned 18. Good kid, good guy. Um, he tunes into the show pretty regularly. But in talking with him, it's almost it's almost as fascinating for me to, tell him about that period of time, right? Because I'm not that old, and yet, talking 9/11, I can do the whole back in my day, routine with him. Back in my day, we only had flip phones, and back in my day, you used to have to rent movies, and that's kind of the other thing is you look at like movies after 9/11 immediately, like, I think the Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire came out like later that year, and like the American flag was definitely prominent, in that film. Uh, there was lots of like American symbology, that like was immediately out there in movies after 9/11, you know, like even in some of the more comedic movies you know, Team America World Police from, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the South Park creators. Like the whole theme of that movie was, America fuck yeah, basically. Literally, that's the theme of that movie is America fuck yeah. Very much post 9/11 patriotism. And I don't want to say it makes me nostalgic, but honestly it does because now with like COVID, I was thinking that COVID would be like the next you know, I was thinking that COVID would be the next event where Americans could truly unify with each other in the same way that we did with 9/11, right? I thought that that was possible. But again, because of social media and because of, also corporate media, the mainstream media, I think they're, just being so polarized politically now. Everything has to be politicized, right? And this is a big issue that I've talked about. Both of the parties have an issue with everything literally being, politicized. No one politicized 9/11, in its immediate aftermath. Of course, there was the whole Iraq war and the Patriot Act and whatnot that obviously did become political, afterwards. And we can discuss all day, whether or not the Patriot Act was a good thing, whether or not it was a bad thing. And for the record, I happen to think now that I'm older that the Patriot Act was a very bad thing. But also, as I've explained to, younger people, after 9/11, people were scared. And so back then, the Patriot Act and the immediate aftermath to a lot of people seemed like a good idea. And we thought it would be temporary, right? We didn't imagine that we'd still have the Patriot Act today. And now people are worried that there's going to be a second Patriot Act, um, with COVID, kind of like a more restricted set, so to speak. And we're already kind of seeing that, with like schools locking down, various times and going to online learning, and some businesses are completely shuttered, and some places you'll get fined if you don't wear a mask, and all this craziness, right? Um, so far I'm not seeing any unity really with, COVID. It just seems to be another point of division. And I'm not saying that I miss 9/11 or that I wish it had never happened, but I do miss the sense of unity that we had as a country after 9/11, and I just wish that we could get back to that. I don't know. I'm just one guy, and I just decided to do this impromptu podcast and give my thoughts on the day. And the other thing of it is this. This brings me to the brave men and women of the NYPD and the FDNY, the Fire Department of New York, right, and the paramedics, cops, and firemen, and really anyone of any law enforcement or civil servant authority. They get demonized all the time right now, today with current events. But you know without the firemen and the police officers, way more people would have died in the Twin Tower attacks. There were millions of lives made, that were saved that day from the firemen and police. And granted, there were obviously, millions of people that were lost that day too. And, many people who were, crippled for life and still suffer from health problems because of injuries or illnesses received, from being buried in rubble, or, dealing with, the fallout of smoke inhalation, or, whatever. But the heroes that showed up that day, and those who saved people's lives, and in some cases gave all that day rushing into the burning buildings, those people are heroes. And we should do right by them to remember them and honor them. So this is my salute over there to everyone who served in the NYPD and the Fire Department of New York. If you're listening to this, if my New York audience is listening to this, thank you for your service and for your sacrifice. And, I'm not a New Yorker, but I've been there, 8 times within my life. So, I'd kind of like to think that I'm a New Yorker in spirit sometimes in some ways. And anyway, folks, I just, today should be a day where we all take time as Americans to, commemorate what happened and honor those who were lost and remember those who were fallen, and to thank those heroes who saved many more lives. And, let today be a day of unity across America. Let us not hate each other, but let us love each other as Americans. Because that's what needs to be done, ultimately. That's what we deserve. That's what America deserves. That's what the American people deserve. And if we can remember the unity that we all have over 9/11, maybe we can unify and get through COVID as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to ramble too much. I know that today's episode was extremely short, but I just wanted to do this quick episode kind of from the cuff, explain my thoughts on this day. And, I love you folks. I love the listening audience of this podcast. You all mean very much to me. I'll be back tomorrow night with Apex Gamma. We'll probably talk about 9/11 on the live show. So tune in, youtube.com/The Whitfield Report, dlivetv.com/The Whitfield Report. We'll also be covering this Netflix controversy and everything else. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in from all of us here at NGC Studios. Have a good night. God bless. God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy in that order. And thank you very much for listening. I will see you on the next episode of the Whitfield Report tomorrow night starting at 10 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, and God bless. Hey there, folks. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to the show. You are the ones that make it possible for me to make an income from podcasting, and I greatly appreciate that just by listening to our show. You are helping us gain ad revenue. However, if you would really like to help support the show, I encourage you to please donate to the podcast and become a supporter of the show. You can head over to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and click the support this podcast button and choose the amount that suits you to support the show. Or you can click the link in the show notes and it will directly take you to that page. If you can support the podcast, I really, really appreciate that. Anything that you can do to help out is greatly appreciated. Even if you can't afford to help financially support the podcast, I encourage you to please go on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and please leave this podcast a positive 5-star review. That really helps us out here at the Whitfield Report. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next episode.